Fanboys can be overwhelming. Now, don't get me wrong, the irony of having a name like Nintendine and posting a video about fanboyism is not lost upon me. But I also think there's a more nuanced way to address the discussion, rather than simply labeling all fanboyism as toxic. I think the first time I truly noticed fanboyism was during the playground wars in the 90s between Sonic and Mario. I don't know if anybody else's experience was like this, but where I grew up, you pretty much had to make your allegiance known. At first, it started off as simple child play. It was kinda cute. Everybody has their favorite video game character and why they love it so much. But at some point, it started to get a little ugly. Granted, this was in elementary school, so it wasn't nearly as toxic as it could be, but there were clear early signs of bullying if you were a Mario fan, because all of the cool kids were Sonic fans. Now, in my case, I was kind of on both sides of it. I've said this in my channel in previous videos, but we had a Super Nintendo and ended up trading it for a friend's Sega Genesis. I didn't see one as greater than the other. In my mind, there were three primary video game characters that everybody had to love: Sonic, Mario, and Donkey Kong. So I didn't really wear a badge of honor, but, I could hang out with the Sega kids to make sure I didn't get bullied. Now, strangely enough, I didn't really notice it as much during the Xbox and PlayStation era. I guess I should probably include the GameCube in that as well, but I didn't have a GameCube. I had an Xbox, and my friends that had a PlayStation 2 all had the exact same games I had on Xbox for the most part. The big difference is that I was playing Halo and they were playing San Andreas, but I question if their parents even knew what was in that game. But that's besides the point. Third-party games in general reigned supreme for me during that era for some reason. Between games like Super Monkey Ball, FIFA, Madden, I think there were a few Dragon Ball Z games too. No matter which console you had, you weren't really missing out on that much. Of course, not including the first-party titles. But each console had a few good flagships that made up for that. So I don't know how many people truly felt the FOMO. Even during the Nintendo 64 era, I don't really recall there being like a whole console war situation. It just felt like everybody had a PlayStation 1 or a Nintendo 64. Obviously, the PlayStation 1 completely outsold the Nintendo 64, but based off of quick sources, living in North America, I think Sony had doubled the Nintendo 64's number, so it was more like a 2-to-1 situation. So every two friends that had a PlayStation, one had a Nintendo 64. And I think that kind of aligns with my memories as well. I wasn't exactly comparing my experience at the time with how many people owned the console overseas. But the point is, at least based off of my arbitrary experience, the first time I truly felt like the wars of the 90s were returning was when we were moving on to the 7th gen. I mean, it makes sense. That was around the age where I was using the internet a lot more, and it was my high school years, so we had nothing else to talk about aside from video games. And not only that, in the prior generation, Sega died. At least that's what it felt like. It was so absurd to think about. They were an actual juggernaut, a household name at that point. And just 1, 2, 3, or 400 terrible decisions later, they went third party. I think the gravity of console wars were felt for me during that generation because I had never seen anything like it before. I wasn't born yet by the time Nintendo became the household console name. Atari in my mind was just something that boomers called Nintendo because they didn't know what the difference was. And they just looked so strange, they didn't look like regular video game consoles. But the point is, now it felt like there was actually something at stake. Console wars kind of mattered. I would hear all the time my friends talking about how Nintendo needs to just become a third-party company like Sega does. They'd make a very confident argument about how nobody would actually want to own a Nintendo system. That's just not what video games are anymore. And how cool it would be to play the Nintendo games on PlayStation or on Xbox because those consoles are actually powerful. I remember up until even a few years ago, I would tell my friends that the GameCube was stronger than the PlayStation 2, and they just did not believe me. Hell, they used to say that the Wii was basically a PlayStation 2. That still kind of happens to this day too. During most of the Switch's life cycle, I would hear people say all the time that they thought that the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 were stronger than the Switch. But in terms of the raw power, the Switch is stronger. The point is, this would lead to tons of discussions, tons of arguments, tons of forums, and they would just go on and on about it. Everybody being entirely convinced that because their console has this game or that game, it makes it better than your console. And I remember it expanded beyond the video games too. Windows versus Mac, Android versus Apple. But the issue is there was never actually a proper discussion. Some people would have certain keywords or catchphrases for each one of their consoles about why it's better, but the arguments usually felt pretty dumb, out of lack of a better term. Like it was two ignorants arguing with each other, just being immature, often leading to insults, to cussing, to screaming. I mean, I think there are playful jokes, like sheeple for Apple. I don't know how offensive people find that to be anymore. Saying Nintendo games are for children to an adult, sure. But it gets to a point where the toxicity starts to surface. Now, just to be clear, in case it's not obvious for some of you, anybody that is throwing insults towards another person for the type of electronic that they use has issues. Like, I'm not talking about the playful stuff. I'm talking about the actual rage-filled arguments that you would not get away with saying to somebody's face. I don't know what you feel like you're accomplishing by insulting somebody online because they don't like the same video game that you like, but you probably shouldn't do it. I know everybody kind of has their own different limits, but at this point, even when I get insulted, I would feel disgusted with myself if I was to turn back and do the same thing. Because I'm like, that person clearly has something going on. It's just weird to me how passionate people can get about this stuff. And again, the irony of my name being Nintendine is not lost upon me. But I don't really think Nintendo is the best console for everybody. I just think it's the best console for me. But there's something strange about people always wanting whatever they like to be the best thing in the world, to almost justify their decision. It's almost like they're cheering for their own sports team that represents them. There's a whole other issue with sports fanatics that is not part of this discussion, but they made fanboys of video game consoles become that. I say they, and I'm totally going to sound crazy right now, but I think there was a very big marketing push when it comes to this stuff. There are a lot of benefits to having fanboys for these corporations. You capitalize on their passion, on their loyalty. They deeply support and advocate what they love, and it helps build and maintain communities. Think of all the online fandoms that you're a part of. You might not have somebody next to you in the real world that loves Fire Emblem as much as you do, but you jump on that subreddit, and all of a sudden you are no longer the flag bearer. It is very nice to be able to connect with people online about things that you love. When you remove, a few of the bad apples that are the most toxic, generally spoiling the bunch, it's kind of a beautiful thing. Long-distance friendships are made over these types of communities. But it's also very beneficial to the corporation, because there's a lot of hype that's involved, a lot of promotions going around. Those promotions come in the form of excitement, which is effectively free marketing. Everybody wants to play that game as soon as it comes out so they can all speak to each other about how great that game was. Or even better, if you missed out on the launch window, most likely because of how hyped they are for that specific video game or console or whatever it might be, they will all speak about how great of an experience it was, convincing you to purchase it. In essence, fanboys often keep fandoms alive during off-seasons or slow periods, and they do so not only with discussions, but with memes, renderings of art, videos, fan theories even. It keeps that hardcore community always on a high, just waiting for the next game to be announced or to drop so that they can take it and run with it. These are the people that are going to buy the limited edition stuff, the merchandise, the DLCs. They're even the ones that are willing to pay whatever price is necessary and make sure that they buy the game early, because the logic is, if it has a good sales window, they'll make us another game. There are just so many benefits of having your own fandom. And while it's beneficial for the consumer, it's also very beneficial for the actual corporation. The issue is, this can eventually become pretty problematic. Someone with this much bias and blind following towards a specific franchise could easily have a very jaded view of what they're looking at. Flaws will be overlooked. Criticisms of the new games will be criticized. It can lead to a drastic prevention of honest discussion and growth. You know what it's like when the mods start to remove the negative posts. They'll justify it by saying they're trying to stop any toxicity before it flows out. But if you're a moderator of a gaming subreddit, you probably have a little bit of that bias and blind following nature yourself. I'm singling out Reddit because that's most of my experience, but this applies to all forums, obviously. There's just a whole ton of gatekeeping going on around the internet when it comes to these things. The issue is, when you remove the toxicity, oftentimes the constructive criticism goes down with it. And if the constructive criticism is gone, all that remains are echo chambers, hive minds, loyalists who wear their badge for being loyal to the cause. So you're left with environments where only positive feedback is allowed, silencing all constructive or dissenting opinions. When this happens in the most hardcore circles of a fandom, it's over, because their opinions of what's good and what's bad will trickle down to the rest of the fandom. And while not all developers take what the fans say to heart, they'll at least have a little bit of focus group testing. So if you can't get feedback anymore, what's left? The status quo? Or it could be worse. It could be below average. Games can easily become very stale. If it ain't broke, why would they fix it? So they don't fix it. Whether it's a video game or a console, the next one that releases is almost the exact same as the previous one, which can be its own problem. Sometimes it's the right answer, sometimes it isn't. But the other issue is, during all of this pre-launch hiatus, this development time, hype was being built up. Remember, these fandoms didn't go anywhere. All of them were sharing their wildest ideas with one another for the past few years. The fandom gets to a point of unrealistic expectations. And when the hype leads to disappointment, when reality doesn't match inflated expectations, that's when a toxic backlash occurs. And when newcomers see how toxic or elitist the fanboys are, they are significantly more likely to turn away. It's like a double-edged sword. The problem is it becomes too difficult to silence the toxicity without silencing the criticism. And then the bigger issue is that when the criticism becomes mistaken for toxicity, when the constructive criticism becomes seen as an attack on the very thing that these fandoms defend to the death, it becomes personal. The shield immediately goes up. The whataboutisms start to surface. The defense of not only their decision, but of the corporation starts to come out. Now, I realize I view corporations as the bad guys. That's kind of been my whole theme for the past few weeks. I think a whole lot of people are in line with me on this perspective, but then you got the random people that'll pop up and be like, well, if you like the corporation so much, why do you give it money? And I mean, that's valid, right? Like I don't think there's anything wrong with calling somebody out for supporting something they dislike. But it's not really that simple. Someone could love shopping at Walmart but hate the way that Walmart brings their products to their store. They might like it for the convenience, they might like it for the low prices. This talk is not sponsored by Walmart, by the way. But Walmart, if you're listening, let's talk. The idea is that there is an exchange going on where even if they are not the perfect corporation, even if they are actually an evil corporation, if they provide enough for me where I feel like it's beneficial to my life, then I will still go to it. And I'm using I, not literally me, but I mean like person thinking it is saying I would go to it. My views towards Nintendo are the same thing. This time, I'm actually using I for myself. Nintendo is not a good corporation. I'd have a difficulty pointing out a good corporation in general, but they provide me experiences and games that I love. And I know everybody's going to talk about how fanboys are an issue and how I'm a fanboy because I'm not just buying Steam games or only supporting indies or whatever other arguments you guys have been making for the past few weeks. Not all of you, but some of you. But the point that I'm trying to get at is that everybody has a limit of how much they're willing to support these corporations because the gain they're receiving from supporting them is still worthwhile to them. But everybody has a different limit. And that's something I'm increasingly noticing is lost on a lot of people out there. Maybe even myself to an extent. But I think we need to respect each other's limits. And more importantly, I think we need to stop defending corporations. I will have a fun argument with anybody out there of why I think Nintendo is better than Sony, from a gameplay, from a console perspective. Heck, I'll have a playful argument with Zelda fans about why I think Mario is better. But if somebody was to say they don't like Mario because his games are too expensive, what right do I have to look back at them and say you're wrong? Contrary to what seems to be a popular belief, the phrase expensive is subjective. It is not objective. Just because X costs $20, it does not mean that Y is worth $15. The value of something is entirely determined based off of what somebody is willing to pay for it. And unless I'm selling the product, why would I care what somebody is willing to pay for something? There is no benefit for me if you buy Mario. I don't care if a company as profitable and the size of Nintendo sells 10 million copies of a game or 20 million copies of a game. I don't care if Sony has the best-selling console of a generation. I didn't build the console, nor did I make any money off of it. Unless one of them gets to the point where they're approaching bankruptcy, I would never feel even remotely obligated to justify any of their prices. And I genuinely question why people online feel the need to justify prices of certain things. It's why I think the whole fanboy thing has some kind of higher power taking control of it and making sure that these things stay marketed to their advantage. Nintendo doesn't even need to come and argue with people that are complaining about price increases because there are so many people out there that will go out of their way to defend them for all their prices. And they'll tell you you're wrong for not thinking this game is worth as much as I do. And again, it's not like we're talking about an indie developer that needs our support. Microsoft could lose a crap ton of money on every single Xbox and have enough in their reserves from all of their other ventures. I don't know how rich Sony is, but I know even if they folded in the console business, which they never will, they will go from being a very lucrative corporation down to being a very lucrative corporation. And don't get me started on Nintendo. They have gold mines. They're not going anywhere. That being said, I understand why somebody would defend the type of game that's made, the type of features a console has, why they think that console is better than another. I think it makes for some really fun conversations. But defending the prices, that one doesn't sit right with me. There's a lot of money in the gaming industry, and most of it, like many other industries, is not being proportionally given to the people that earned it the most. But these companies have frequently found more and more ways to make money off of the games, whether it's through their services, downsizing on production costs, DLC, digital games, hardware and accessories. Doesn't matter, they found ways to make money. It's the reason why so many consoles actually have a small profit margin, with the only exception usually being Nintendo consoles, because the games themselves make them so much money that it's worth taking that loss on the console when they know they're going to make it up elsewhere. So it just makes me wonder why a fanboy of a company would go out of their way to not only give that company their own money, even though they think kind of overpriced, but to also get mad at other people for not willing to dish out that same dollar to that company. Despite how much I think toxicity might be the biggest detriment on a human level of fanboys existing, they might be an even bigger detriment on a quality level, on a cost level, on a production level. Everyone always talks about how the best thing that can happen to the gaming community is competition. Having two different juggernauts both be selling very well forces them to compete with one another for our dollars, which means they'll make better products to earn our dollars. But that implies that we have to give them our dollars. Contrary to popular belief, we don't. If you want the gaming industry to have better video games, better services, better consumer practices, at a lower cost, you have to stop viewing it as Nintendo versus Sony versus Microsoft or insert any other developer. It's consumer versus corporation. We only have two tools to use in order to get the things that we want. It's in our hands more than you think. Our wallets and our voices. If we use those two things against the corporation, they will come crawling to you and give you everything you want and then some for cheap. They will find a way. But if you just keep supporting them blindly, why would they even try? It's very important to remember that we didn't get the Switch by supporting the Wii U. We got the Switch because the Wii U failed. I'm not going to sit here and bash the Wii U and say that it's a bad console, but in my opinion, the Switch is one of the best consoles I've ever had in my life. If the Wii U didn't fail, we'd still be using Wii remotes. Nintendo is not your friend, just like they're not my friend. I don't believe they owe me anything, contrary to so many comments in the previous videos. Nor do I believe they're a charity, but it goes both ways. I'm not their charity either. I am not obligated to buy their console or their games, or even close my mouth and not speak online just because they want their Switch 2 to succeed. Just because their fans want the Switch 2 to succeed. That's not how that works. And this goes for every company, not just Nintendo. No matter how much you think their own upfront cost is, if they want success, they have to make it worth it to enough people in order to achieve that success. They told us the 3DS was not worth anything less than $250, and not long after that, it was dropped down. I believe the 3DS actually ended up getting sold at a loss. But because they made so much money elsewhere, they still were profitable. They sold enough of them. They found a way to succeed with lower prices. Because the consumers told them, we expect better. As a Nintendo fanboy, I expect better from Nintendo, and I will blindly not support them in order to ensure they get better. If something is not worth it to me, I won't buy it. And if enough people share that same sentiment, then they will find a way to get us to buy it. Because even if selling their console at a loss is not profitable, they know that us owning it, even if it is at a loss, is profitable. So no, they're not a charity, even if they're selling it at a loss. That's how the free market works. The last thing I'll share is one of the most ridiculous comments I've seen all week. It talks about how amazing Tears of the Kingdom looked on the original Switch, and how they cannot wait to see how shiny and sparkly it looks on the Nintendo Switch too. Which is fine, I can agree to that. Then they say that $10 is nothing, and it's so little for the 4 features that they got. You know, HDR, up to 4K in docked mode, 60 frames per second and all that. And how genius Nintendo was for coming up with the idea of including a mobile app, and that they should patent this idea. Again, that's fine. you're very passionate about this. I get it. But the last part of the comment is the embodiment of the issue I have with these corporation fanboys. The commenter says that if you were to ask me, for everything that we're receiving on the Nintendo Switch 2 edition of Tears of the Kingdom, they should be charging us $20 minimum, if not more. That may not sound absurd to anybody, but that blew my mind. And for those of you that think that Mario Kart 8 World is worth $80 for whatever reason you believe it is worth that value, just know that if you also think it's absurd that this person thinks that we should be charged $20 or more for what they're doing to Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, that's how everybody looks at you when you try to argue that Mario Kart World is worth $80 instead of $70. If it's worth it to you, pay for it. But stop telling people they should be happy with the price if they're unhappy with it. Thanks again for listening. I'll be back on Thursday.